John, meanwhile, President Biden's meeting with Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell, that is happening in just moments, we are told, as inflation remains at its highest level in this country in decades, a 40-year high still. This comes as last month's personal savings rate dropped to its lowest level since 2008, fueling fears of the big R word, recession. Joining us now is Gene Sperling, Senior Advisor to President Biden. Thank you so much, Gene, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Is that going to happen? Do you believe this country is entering a recession?
I'm not in the forecast business, but here's where I would strike a somewhat more reassuring note. There's no question that we had record job creation and record drops in unemployment during this recovery, but that we do now need to transition to a more stable and balanced growth with lower prices. And we believe that when you look at the strengths that have come out of this recovery that are in the U.S. economy, that we are better positioned than really any nation in the world to make that transition, even in the face of the steps that monetary policy, independent monetary authorities will make to dampen the global inflationary pressures hitting U.S. consumers. And I think, you know, what should give some of those indicators are the fact that we've brought back 3.8 million Americans into the workforce, that actually, when you look at a more complete view of household balance sheets, you see, as J.P. Morgan put out the other day, the checking accounts are actually stronger up and down the income level than they were in 2019. The credit card balances and household debt service are very low. That businesses have now built up inventories and so are going to have less price hikes related to supply constraints. So I think when you look overall, we believe that we are well positioned to make this transition to a more balanced and economic growth with lower prices without giving up many of those historic gains, that in fact many of those historic gains will be the source of resilience to that transition to a more stable economic growth.
You know, Gene, among the records that the White House set that you pointed out there is also 40-year record on inflation. Something that didn't go unnoticed by the Washington Post, out with an article today talking about the missteps that the president and administration officials made with respect to inflation. The Washington Post notes, quote, U.S. policymakers misjudged inflation threat until it was too late. Officials often played down rising prices as problems mounted around the world. Question to you, was the White House fiddling as Rome began to burn?
Not at all. Look, globally, there is no question that a few things have happened that have certainly affected what people thought. Really, experts all over the world thought was the expected trajectory of inflation. One, there's no question that Delta and Omicron slowed the supply side correction. There's no question that Putin and the aggression has had a major negative impact on global energy prices, and certainly in the U.S., where a gallon of gas was $3.31 on January 17th when Putin first moved troops to the border in Belarus. Now they're $1.31 higher. So there's no question there have been things that have affected global inflation. And just today, you saw the Euro go out and say that their inflation was at 8.1%. You saw the OECD, which is the 38 largest economies, is at 8.8%. The UK is at 9%. So this is a global inflation issue that has certainly been affected by things like the aggression in Ukraine that were hard to predict.
But this is America, and we have shown historically that we are able to. We're able to tackle inflation when we take the right steps. And let me just ask you something, Gene. How can we be assured that this is a White House that's going to take this supply chain crisis, this inflation crisis seriously, when the president's own chief of staff, Ron Klain, back in October, referenced inflation and the supply chain crisis as a high-class problem? Does this White House really see this as a problem for everyday, hardworking Americans?
You know, we do see this as a serious problem. And while We cite the global numbers to make clear that this is a global phenomenon. We are very aware every day that that's of little comfort to an American family going up to the gas pump or going through the grocery line and seeing higher prices. And so, you see the president today meeting with the Federal Reserve chairman. But what you also saw in his op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today was him laying out his approach. One of the first things he said was that he would completely respect the independence of the Federal Reserve, even in this tough time. Now, that's not necessarily the usual thing. Since the 1960s, 5 different presidents, including the prior president, have sought to berate or interfere or bully or intimidate the Federal Reserve when it had to take tough steps to tame inflation. Now you're seeing a president stepping back and saying he's going to respect the independence. He's going to give them the room they need. You also see him saying that he's going to do everything in his power to lower prices.
But the question
on families,
is this a president?
Obviously, the historic SPR. Strategic Petroleum Release, and the fact that we are seeing significant deficit reduction, 1.5 trillion in deficit reduction, which, as we know, will dampen inflationary pressures.
But to John's point, so is this a reaction rather than the president getting ahead of this problem? I mean, you had your colleagues, Larry Summers from the Obama administration, you had Steve Rattner, that were warning about inflation on the way well over a year ago, well before Putin invaded Ukraine.
I think that we have been where most experts around the world, including our Federal Reserve, including other central banks, have been, and we have always been focused on it. And as it's adjusted, as we saw that the impact of the variants on the supply chain, as we saw the impact on Russia, we've obviously only heightened our focus on bringing prices down. The president says often, his focus is on working American families, and he knows that that even with the record job growth, even with the record drops in unemployment, even with the fact that there are so many families out there where someone's been able to get a raise, a promotion, leave for a new job, he knows that it is those higher prices at the gas pump and in the grocery line that, affect people. And he has said he grew up in a family where those price increases hurt them. So, no, I think we have focused on it the whole time. But look, when things change, when forecast and the reality gets worse, you adjust. That's what you do when you're in the White House. That's what this president's doing.
So, Gene, to Sandra's point there, when you talk about forecast, some people appeared to have very clear crystal balls while others were more opaque, including, as Sandra pointed out, Larry Summers, who wrote on March 15th, 2021, quote, "I believe the Fed has not internalized the magnitude of its errors over the past year, is operating with an inappropriate and dangerous framework, and needs to take far stronger action to support price stability than appears likely." Way back then, he was predicting stagflation and recession. And a question that I have is, you know Summers very well. He used to work for President Obama. Why was no one listening to him?
Well, you just read a quote about Larry Summers, our former Secretary of Treasury under President Obama, critiquing the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve.
Warning that inflation was on the horizon and was going to rise up and bite us in the buttocks if we didn't do something about it.
That was his comment that you just quoted on the Federal Reserve. Now, I'm not going to comment on it because I just got done saying that we respect the independence of the Fed and that we are not in the exercise of berating them or second-guessing them.
But, Gene, it was a warning to everybody. It was a comment on the Fed, but it was a warning to everybody, contained in a broader warning, as Sandra knows all too well, from Larry Summers. Inflation's on the horizon. It's going to bite us. We better do something about it. And nobody did anything. Except oh, it's transitory.
I just disagree with that, and I could quote you 20, 30 other experts who had different projections, who thought inflation was coming down, who thought that what happened was that the global supply chains got worse and did not react. And this particularly hurt the United States when we're the most dependent on, when higher car prices have the largest negative impact on us, when we already had a housing supply shortage, when many of our companies, like rental car companies, cut down dramatically and had a harder time re-upping. So I think that the president has been very much where the larger number of experts in the country and around the world have been. And I think the idea that he hasn't taken steps is just not true.
Well, if he has, the point is anybody who's just a second. Let us get in for a second. We've let you go on for quite some time. If he has been obsessed with bringing gas prices down, why are we at a brand new record high today? Why are we seeing $4.62 a gallon at the pump if this president's been obsessed with tackling gas prices and inflation?
You know the answer. You know the answer to that. You know that this is global. You read the papers today. You know that the euro just said that inflation was 8.1%. You read the papers last week that the UK was at 9%.
So there's nothing we can do about it. And you know there's nothing we as a country can do to bring prices down.
I've explicitly said the opposite. I explicitly said the opposite. What did I say? One, that you put in a strong Federal Reserve and you respect their independence and their need to take tough measures to bring down inflation.
This is serious stuff. This is serious stuff. This is affecting everyday Americans and cutting into their ability to provide food for their families. How are you? And give us a forecast. Give us a forecast. Where can you have gas prices? Let's say by the end of the year. Where will they be?
This is a serious issue. And what you're doing right now is trying to put me in the position of being a forecaster. And what you asked before was the right question. What are we doing?
Okay, who's advising the president on the economy?
As we just said, if you read the president's
forecast
op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, if you read his op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, what we said was that when you look at the strength of household balance sheets, when you look at the fact that inventories are higher, when you look at 3.8 million Americans coming back into the workforce, all of these things suggest that we are in a strong position to make a transition to more balanced economic growth, even with the Federal Reserve having to take tough actions. And then I went through three things: that unlike past presidents, he was going to give all the room and independence to the Federal Reserve to bring down policies. That two, that we were not only, because of his policy, seeing $1.5 trillion in deficit reduction, but that his new policies for the reconciliation would actually bring down the deficit further dampening inflation.
You are a senior advisor to the president, and we're just simply asking, what can you tell the American people where prices will be a few months from now? What is your ability to control those prices and bring them down?
What you want from your president is that they're doing everything they can, which is why he had a historic release of 180 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, 1 million a day, and why he's asking for 60 million more. It's why he's asking to bring down prescription drug costs that would lower inflation and help working families. Well, look, you know, we can just keep restating this. We face a global inflation problem.
But that's true.
I've just said the numbers are the same everywhere.
You can release as much oil as you want from the Spro. It's not bringing down prices.
And I just said that the president today, just today, in the Wall Street Journal, has an op-ed going through his approach about giving independence to the Fed, giving them room to make tough choices with the strongest tools, monetary tools, that you've seen a commitment.
Well, does he worry the Fed has gotten this wrong? The Fed's gotten this all wrong. The Fed got inflation wrong. They thought it was transitory. Is he confident that they can get this right?
Reduction through his reconciliation plan that would further dampen inflation.
Are we going to hear anything from that meeting?
All the individual items that he's taken.
Can we hear anything from that meeting? Will he be on camera?
I do not know what the press plan is. I think a meeting like that is normally kept close hold so that they can have a frank discussion. And I think it's good that when a president respects the independence of the Federal Reserve Chairman, it makes it easier for them to have a discussion, because the Federal Reserve Chairman knows the president will not cross any boundaries or seek to intimidate them. President Biden's made that clear. He respects the independence. He's made clear that inflation is his #1 priority. Bringing down prices and costs for families is their #1 priority. And I think that shows, an unusual and unfortunately too infrequent degree of leadership and by the president and respect for the independence of the Federal Reserve. And no, I am not a forecaster, and I'm not going to predict what year the Tigers are going to finally win the World Series.
Who is forecasting for the president? For economists, that is everything. Which economist is advising the president?
The president has a world-class team, including the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, who is the only woman in the history of our country to be this CEA chair, to be chairman of the Federal Reserve, and to be Secretary of Treasury. And he has a top-class Council of Economic Advisors that is headed by Cecilia Rouse, who was the dean of the Woodrow Wilson, or now just the Princeton Public Policy School. These are excellent economists, but it doesn't mean that they have crystal balls, and it doesn't mean that people can predict everything that happens, including a type of Russian aggression on a neighboring European country that
Gene,
we really
appreciate you joining us.
Since World War II.
These are pretty simple questions, and we appreciate you joining us, but people just want to know what the plan is. I mean, gas prices all-time high, inflation at a 40-year high.
You know what?
The president in his piece makes the case that the economy is thriving.
Here's the deal. I just go through the plan, and you just pretend that I didn't say it. You just ignore it, and you just ask the same questions. It's your show if that's what you want to do. But when I'm going through this and you just interrupt, I don't see how that's helping your viewers. Now, you could say that you disagree
we gave you quite a bit of time
plan.
to explain.
By the way, last time I was on this show, you were upset because I was talking about the Rick Scott plan that was a leading Republican who was going to raise taxes. Right, and then you said, oh, that's not the plan. You don't have a plan to discuss on the Republican side. You have no plan.
Democrats are in leadership.
Out a plan that the president just laid out.
The Senate, the White House.
The president just laid out.
And you want the plan to come from Republicans?
The president just laid out in the Wall Street Journal. And you just want to keep asking the same question. If you'd like to discuss, let's discuss. Should we give Medicare the power to lower prescription drug prices to help at the pocketbooks for tens of millions of senior Americans and working families? Should we cap $35
to go to work?
Should we have a deficit-neutral way of paying for child care so more people could go back to work, earn more money, and reduce inflationary pressures? Should we do that? These are all specific proposals that the president has. Should we pay for things with corporate tax reform that has a 15% minimum tax that would also lower the deficit and further dampen inflationary pressures? These are all part of President
plan to forgive student loan debt?
And if you want to discuss them, if you want to discuss them with me, we can.
But we're talking about a president that could be deploying more. He will have an announcement soon, you said?
He has not made an announcement yet, and I don't tend to have the habit of announcing things before he does.
Would you support that if he goes that direction? Is that a good idea?
I'm going to give the president the room to make his decision. I do think that the fact that he has paused student loans for over 40 million Americans has helped them get through this pandemic, and I think there's really no evidence that that has had a negative effect on inflation.
Gene, love talking to you. Thank you for coming on. We hope to get you back soon. Clearly, there is a lot of ground yet to till, but thank you for coming on and explaining your point of view.
You're welcome to come back anytime.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.